I asked you to decide the map and destiny of Earth after the Second World War. So today we're going to change this map of the world as you decided. We're going to first talk about the European theater and Africa, and then we'll move to Asia. Starting with the first poll, in which I asked what should have been done to Germany after World War II, and the results were the following. 11% of you voted for occupied, 13% voted for divided, then 55% voted for East and West Germany, and 22% voted for independence. Now in our timeline, Germany was split by East and West too, and that's why I specified in 1945. So the Allies occupied Germany and immediately established East and West Germany, and their neighbors Austria will instead be neutral. In my opinion, this decision could be taken far too early, as Central Europe is still destroyed by the war, and the Allied supported occupation are needed more than ever in Germany. So establishing so early East and West Germany could be a big mistake. If there's a direct Allied intervention in Central Europe, then it will make much more sense. But if Germany was re-established so early, it could even speed up the unification of the country. Let's move into the East with our next poll. What should have been the fate of Europe after World War II? The results were 15% voted for all annexed, 12% voted for just communist influence, and an absolute majority of 72% voted for full independence. The first one is self-explanatory. The second one is the canon timeline, which really happened as the USSR influenced the eastern countries. Then full independence means that what would have been the communist satellite states of the Warsaw Pact have instead had fair and free elections, and therefore are independent states linking Western Europe. In addition, some Soviet republics such as the Baltics and Ukraine get more autonomy. So this decision could have been very unlikely, as the Soviets have suffered an enormous amount of casualties and struggles during the war, and Stalin was trying to get as much influence and compensation as possible. The good thing is that in a scenario like this, the communists would have had better relationships with the West, as they didn't force the communist regime over Western Europe. With the next one, we remain in Eastern Europe, as the question is, what should have been the map of Finland after World War II? So we got our answers here. 12% voted for Finland to become a Soviet Socialist Republic. 3% voted for a white Finnish government. 15% voted for the standard Finland of our timeline, and then 70% voted for Finland to have a pre-1940 borders, which include mainly Karelia and some northern territories. In the first one, we see Finland becoming a part of the Soviet Union and becoming a Soviet republic itself after being occupied by the Soviets as a compensation of the continuation war. A totally different scenario is the second, in which White Finland gets established, which means that the Finnish government became once again an anti-communist rule, thus ordering the expulsion or imprisonment of all communists in Finland to counter the advance of communism as much as possible. Then, normal Finland is self-explanatory, as this is the one we got in our timeline. The final Finland restores its borders as they were before the Winter War. This could have had a little chance to happen, if Finland wasn't to then invade the USSR with Germany. Nonetheless, the decision has been taken, and therefore Finland gets it. Let's now discuss the destiny of Yugoslavia after the war. So 9% of you voted for dissolving the country, splitting everyone apart. 43% wants to divide the country in half. 25% chooses to make it stay united, and finally 23% wants to make it communist. Now in 1945 it could be very early for Yugoslavia to totally break apart after a major war. In addition, it could lead to more tension since some countries will choose to become communist and others become allies of the West. Making the country named the Kingdom of Yugoslavia is a pretty neutral choice, and there's not really much to say about it. Making it become communist is what happened in real life, but in this timeline, being so far from the Soviet Union could lead the country to not being aligned with the USSR in the first place. Dividing the country in the Kingdom of Serbia and the independent state of Croatia and Bosnia seems to be the choice for the majority of you. My theory for this to happen would be that after the partition of Yugoslavia during the war and the creation of the independent state of Croatia created a feeling of self-ruling country in Croatia, Bosnia and Slovenia, therefore creating their own separate state. I think it's a cool thing to see happen in our map since it distances itself from the rest of the hypothesis. Up next we get to choose Italy's government after World War II. The results were 7% for occupied, 7% for a socialist government, 17% voted for the monarchy, 69% voted for the republic. So in the first case we see Italy being simply partitioned between the allies like Germany. In the second one, Italy becomes communist and becomes a socialist republic. The third one brings back the monarchy and the king like it was before the war. The majority of you, however, voted for the republic to be established like in real life. I guess that's what we get, so Italy, like in our war, becomes a constitutional republic, therefore allied of the West. In the next poll we decide the fate of Greece. 23% for the monarchy, 64% for the republic, 13% for communist. The first one is what happened in our timeline, in which Greece keeps the Hellenic Republic with a monarchic government. In our timeline, this caused the Greek civil war in the years following, in which the Greek communists tried to take over the country. So if the communists won the civil war, the country will have turned like in the third option, which is also the least voted one. Greece in our timeline and in our poll became a republic and gave up the monarchist government, like it happened with Italy. Seems like you guys are more for republics instead of monarchies. Up next we got, should France and Britain have decolonized after World War II? The results were 16% no, 5% partially, 7% almost completely, and 72% totally. In the first scenario, the European powers do not decolonize and Africa remains occupied. The second one liberates the main countries, but the colonial powers keep their possession on poorer countries. The third one is like the second one, but with more steps, as France and Britain get to keep only some countries for their benefit. The last one is what we're gonna use, and it's where the main colonial countries leave Africa, and so we get a whole bunch of countries in the continent. Like in our timeline, this could be a problem if many countries decide to align themselves with the Soviet Union. But either way, the process to free the continent here is promoted much more, and probably the other European powers will be forced to leave the continent too in the next decades. Moving into Asia, it's time to decide the destiny of Japan. 12% voted for Imperial Japan if they decided not to surrender. 9% voted for the partition of the island. 71% voted for independence, and 7% wants to occupy it. In the first option, the Japanese Empire fell, but mainland Japan decides to come into defensive mode and not surrender. In the second, the south of the island gets occupied by the Americans and the north becomes communist. The third is the independent ending, in which Japan gets independence as a democratic country right away. The last is just occupied as in our timeline. I don't think it will change much from our history, as Japan got independence in the 1950s, and with the Allied economic support, Japan will still be rebuilt and become a free country. Now, with neighboring Korea, we got 82% to unite the peninsula, 3% for Chinese expansion, 8% for partition, 6% for independent south and north right away. This poll impressed me for the imbalance. I didn't expect so much for united and so little for partitioned, as it happened with our timeline. I guess we like things to be united rather than broken. This will be the same thing that happened with Austria but in Asia, where a country gets united but with no alignment. I guess it could work in some way, at least the north wouldn't be oppressed by a brutal dictatorship this time. Next is for Korea's neighbor, China. 14% voted for a divided China, 72% for the Republic, and another 14% for a socialist or communist China. As we saw in other polls, even this time the anti-communist government wins. Seems like people don't like communism as much as they did once. The first option is very different, as China gets split in many regions. That doesn't seem the dream of many, apparently. So this is official. The communists lose the civil war and the republic gets established. Also, Tibet and every Chinese state gets annexed. We are almost finished as we move to Indochina, with the following results. 10% wants to maintain the French colonial territory, 66% for a united Indochina, 24% for independence. This one also got me thinking, as a united Indochina will break apart faster than a Balkan Union. The colonized percentage seems about right. 1 person out of 10 will keep French Indochina. The last one is the most reasonable, as Indochina gets independence as it happened with our timeline in the following decades. At any rate, the united ending is what we get, and we should be proud of them. Now it's time for the Dutch East Indies. 6% would like to create West Indonesia, 10% prefers to keep them Dutch, 7% wants to keep some for the Dutch and some independent, 77% goes for full independence. In this poll the options are quite similar, as the Dutch occupy some or the whole territories of Indonesia. I'm not quite sure what will be in East Indonesia for the first, but anyway, you voted for independence and that's what we are giving them. We reached our final poll, the fate of British Raj. 14% wants to keep the British colonies, 11% votes for giving them the Commonwealth status, 5% wants just India to be independent, 71% wants the whole Raj to become independent. The first option will be like the African situation, in which the European powers kept their colonies for some time and then get independence. In the second, we get the regions of the Raj to join the Commonwealth of the British Empire, being granted some autonomy and government. The third option proposes the same thing but with India on their own. This option will make the British Empire have much less work to do, but still have revolts for independence in the remaining Commonwealth countries. The last one is what we get in our timeline with India, Pakistan, Burma, and East Pakistan for now. We finally finished all the maps, so it's time to unite everything into a single war map. And there you go, this is what you voted for after the Second World War. Let's now see the statistics. Thanks for watching.